Landing on the moon sparked more than a moment of celebration. It opened our world to a whole new space and made us believe we could achieve the impossible. Celebrate the 50th anniversary of mankind's greatest leap with special coverage on BBC World News.
They say traitor. We say divisive, unpopular, controversial, defiant. They report what she did. We're on to why she did it. They get caught up in the story. We see the big picture. When they rush to conclusions, we rush to the scene. It's black and white, they say. It's never black and white. BBC News. Find out what's actually happening.
You're watching GMT on BBC World News. Our top stories. President Trump is accused of racism after telling a group of ethnic minority politicians to go back to where they came from. He told the 4 women, 3 of whom were born in America, they should fix the catastrophic governments in their countries of origin instead of criticising the US. We'll bring you rare access from inside Iran as last-ditch talks try to stop the country's nuclear deal from collapsing.
Iran is still a good year away from developing a nuclear weapon. We think there is still some closing but small window to keep the deal alive.
England!
And surely the most exciting World Cup cricket match of all time, England beating New Zealand in a thrilling final. Look at this picture. We're going to be talking to the diver who got up close and personal with this giant jellyfish. Also on the programme, Aaron is looking at China's economy today.
Yeah, Lucy, we know it's the world's second biggest, and we also know it's having a bit of a trade tussle with the biggest. And I tell you what, that US trade war is beginning to bite. China's economy grew at its slowest rate in nearly 30 years. So stay with us, because we're going to find out, what does Beijing do? Will it throw more cash into the economy? And will the low numbers force the Chinese to finally strike a deal with Washington?
Hello, welcome to GMT. I'm Lucy Hawkins. President Trump has triggered a furious reaction from the Democratic Party after he suggested that a group of ethnic minority congresswomen go back and help the places from which they came. It's thought he was referring to 4 congresswomen. 3 were born in the US, 1 moved to the US as a child. Let's show you what he said, describing countries with catastrophic governments, accusing the representatives of telling the American people their government and how it should be run, before concluding, why don't they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they come? Well, I'm joined here in the studio by Greg Swenson from Republicans Abroad. And let's take you to the US and talk to Daniel Lippman from Politico. Daniel, can we start with you, just with how these tweets have been received and whether they are broadly being seen as racist?
They're not being received well at all. Many Republicans are loath to defend this because it smacks of apparent racism. And for example, the New York Times, they reached out to 6 campaign and White House spokesmen of Trump yesterday to try to get a response, and no one wanted to touch it. And even Trump's border protection commissioner on the Sunday shows yesterday, he said he didn't want any part of it as well. He said you have to ask the president for his reaction to the tweets, why he did that. And so this seems like another moment when Trump is trying to put salt in America's racial wounds.
Well, let's bring you one reaction coming in from Meghan McCain, the daughter of the late Republican Senator John McCain. Let's just show you what she had to tweet, saying Trump's comments are racist. I see Trump people are trying to spin this just to be about Representative Omar, but we all know that's a lie. Even if it were just about her, it would still be racist. We don't tell people we've welcomed into this country to go back. That's a reaction we've seen from quite a few people. Greg. Your response to these tweets?
This is another day in the life of the Twitter feed from the president, and it's often self-inflicted wounds, as you've seen today. I don't think it helps anybody in this case. There is a lot of sensitivity to it. You saw it last week with Speaker Pelosi when she made an argument, I think it was with the New York Times, that with Maureen Dowd, when she talked about the fact that the Squad only has 4 votes in the Congress, so she's not worried about it. And then, of course, AOC came out and said it was racist because I'm a person of color. So there's a lot of sensitivity to it, and it's self-defeating.
Yeah, what is the president trying to achieve by a tweet like this?
Look, the president feels like he doesn't get a fair shake from the media, so he wants to go direct to the people, to the voters. There might be some merit to that argument, but I think he'd be much better served if he allowed his staff and his press people. I mean, I'd rather see a press release from his staff or Kellyanne Conway or someone that, can at least filter a little bit, do their homework. Obviously, he didn't do his homework that, 3 of the 4 Congress people are from, born in America. And so, he's not a student of history. He doesn't often do his homework. This is what happens when you don't do your homework.
And Daniel, I want to ask you that same question too. What do you think the president was trying to achieve by these series of tweets?
Well, people like Congressman Omar and AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they are not very popular among Trump's base, and so this is trying to keep him interesting and provocative for his base voters who are often skeptical of immigrants. And so he needs these voters of his, the hardcore Trump supporters, he needs them energized for 2020. And so he doesn't seem to be playing much to getting moderate voters. And so while this may be a good short-term strategy for him because he gets all the Twitter feedback and everyone is talking about him, in the long run in November 2020, this might be much harder for him to surmount because the Democratic candidate will use this against him and try to drive up the percentage of the vote from people who love immigrants and welcome them to this country.
Greg, senior Republicans have not responded to these tweets either. Surely they have even a moral obligation to do so. Right.
Look, I think there's a limit to the president's tweets. He does this almost daily. Sometimes he hits it, sometimes he misses. Obviously, he missed with this one. It was not filtered at all. Look, I think it's a mistake, but I think you have to have a little perspective here.
But it does almost feel like that there's no line now that the president can't cross. That there are certain times where you've got to take a stand.
And look, a week ago I was saying AOC and the Squad were basically ensuring his re-election by going to the extreme left, by saying they want to abolish ICE. There's a silent majority in the country that actually believes that illegal immigration has to be dealt with. And I think that what we're missing here from your other guest is that it's not immigration that he's against, it's illegal immigration. Now again, this tweet did not send that message properly. I mean, obviously he's talking about real immigrants, legal immigrants in these 4 congressmen. So I totally get that this tweet was a mistake, but I think a little perspective that he is actually appealing to moderates, even in their own party. The Squad is not popular within the Democratic Party, and look at Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, but on that, if I can bring you in, Daniel, on the politics, the Democrats were fractured. This is actually uniting them. It's working against the president now.
Yeah, it's very ironic that now Pelosi is taking the side of those 4 congresswomen because this is seen as an attack on the Democratic caucus and anyone who knows people who came from this country. And so there was a congressman from Connecticut, Jim Himes, who said, well, I'm actually foreign born. I was born in Peru where his dad was working abroad there. But, President Trump didn't attack me. And so going after those 4 minority women, that's seen as more less veiled in the racism that people might see from these tweets.
Greg, Daniel, thank you both very much for joining us. We're going to keep talking about the issue of migration, illegal immigration into the US as well. There was a planned nationwide operation against undocumented migrants meant to happen over the weekend. It has so far failed to materialise. Immigration officials and President Trump had said there would be a series of raids targeting 2,000 people who'd been served with deportation orders. Only a few had been reported. What's going on? Let's talk now to Wade McMullen, who joins us from Washington, managing attorney at Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, the human rights advocacy organisation. Wade, good to have you with us. Why do you think we didn't see these raids over the weekend?
It's a good question, and I think it's no coincidence that the same time that the president was making a lot of public bluster about these raids beginning is the same timing that he is also tweeting these extremely racist remarks about these women of color who are leading in our Congress today, telling them to go back to where they came from. And I think that what this shows is that this is so much more about Trump playing politics and playing to his base and trying to sow terror than it is about actually achieving any legitimate law enforcement ends.
The threat of these raids, though, how does it make people, undocumented migrants, or even people who are in the US legally feel knowing that that could happen to them? They could get that knock on the door.
Well, as I mentioned, the idea of announcing law enforcement raids weeks in advance and then even precisely announcing the specific day that they're going to happen, that's not a law enforcement tactic. This is the president trying to rile up support for his nativist policies. And the accomplishment of what he's trying to do is crystal clear. People are afraid, and it's not just undocumented immigrants. It's not just immigrants who are here and people who are here trying to seek refuge from the terror in their home countries. It's their friends, it's their family members. We see congregations and houses of worship all over the country opening their doors because they are afraid for their community members. We see hotel chains afraid that they are going to be weaponized and used in Trump's deportation force, separating families and caging and housing children in their hotels. You know, this is terror that is being sown across the entire country, and it's unequivocal, and it's happening not just to immigrants, not just to undocumented immigrants, but to many of us in these communities.
This is an issue that many Americans care deeply about on both sides of the divide. There's lots of passionate feeling about it. Why is it so difficult to solve? What are the structural issues that need to be solved?
Sure. So, unfortunately, when it comes to these issues, oftentimes it only stops at the level of politics. And right now, the president is playing politics and using intentional fear-mongering to rile up his base. And he's actually not working towards a solution. These ICE raids, for example, have been placed on pause. ICE hadn't been conducting these large workplace or residential raids during the last administration, and they have been reinstated under this administration with an attempt to sow that fear. And so if we could get past the rhetoric of politics and the scapegoating of immigrants to rile up political support and look towards solutions, that's the first start. The second thing is this administration continues to point to Congress and the lack of action in Congress. And yes, our immigration system is fundamentally broken. Even the last administration, the Obama administration, was implementing it imperfectly and couldn't get that reform across. But it's not Congress's fault that the crisis at the border right now, at the southern U.S. border, is happening. The Trump administration is taking executive action, making intentional policy decisions to fill up the cages in these detention centers with people who are seeking asylum, to announce that they're going to go on mass raids that could possibly violate their rights and the rights of others and make the detention centers and these concentration camps even more full and overcrowded, and to spend billions of dollars to create a symbolic border wall that actually nobody thinks is going to be an effective tool to addressing the issue of immigration.
We have to leave it there. Wade McMullen, thank you very much for joining us from Washington.
Thank you.
We're going to take you live to Johannesburg now, a dramatic couple of hours there. South Africa's former President Jacob Zuma giving evidence to an inquiry looking at claims that he oversaw widespread corruption during his time in office. Let's just show you him arriving at the hearing about 3 hours ago. He denies being part of a network which gave government business to three wealthy brothers, the Guptas, in return for bribes. Let's have a listen to what he said just a short time ago.
I've been a subject of talk in this country for more than a decade. I've been vilified, alleged to be the king of corrupt people.
Let's take you to Milton Nkosi, who joins us from outside the hearing in Johannesburg. Milton, give us an idea of what this means to South Africans, this inquiry, and whether this feels like quite a momentous moment to see Jacob Zuma there giving evidence.
Oh yes, indeed. South Africans are glued to their radios and television screens, a lot of them watching this testimony by the former President Jacob Zuma on social media as well. President Zuma has been speaking now for nearly 2 hours. He's just stopped to take a lunch break, but essentially he told the commission here that he is a victim of a conspiracy to remove him from leadership in South Africa. He says this conspiracy dates back to the early 90s when apartheid was coming to an end. He said there are many people within the ANC who worked with apartheid regime intelligence organizations to bring him down. And today he named one of his former ministers as a spy.
Milton, we're just going to show our viewers something that happened before he gave testimony, where he posted on Twitter, Jacob Zuma, this little bit of video saying, "I thought I should brighten up your day."
Zuma must fall, Zuma must fall, Zuma must fall, Zuma must fall, Zuma.
I mean, Milton, what's the reaction been to Jacob Zuma apparently laughing at this judge-led commission and inquiry? There's lots of evidence that we've heard over the past few months against him, and here he is chuckling.
Yes, some people loved it and they enjoyed President Zuma. He is known for being a giggler in the middle of serious matters, so that was no surprise. But other people thought that this was some form of pressure, giving itself out, playing itself out via that tweet. They thought that the pressure of coming here was beginning to take a toll on him. President Zuma said there were numerous attempts on his life, including poisoning, as he told the judge this morning. He said that many people in the ANC were following this agenda, this conspiracy of him to be removed, because he used to be the head of intelligence within the ANC, and he said that there are many people who still work for organizations that are trying to bring him down.
Milton, good to see you. Thanks for joining us from outside the Commission of Inquiry there in Johannesburg. Let's bring you an update now on Ebola, because we've been hearing from the Democratic Republic of Congo that officials are vaccinating people who came into contact with a man who tested positive for Ebola. This was a case reported in a pastor who had travelled to Goma. Now, that's a city of about 1 million people near the border with Rwanda. It's the first time the virus has been found there. The authorities saying all potential cases, though, have been isolated, but of course a real concern now in Goma about this development. Let's talk to Tulip Mzimda, who is our global health correspondent. Tell us a bit more about this case, Tulip. This is a pastor, and I presume that he was putting his hands on people quite a lot at times. Is that how he contracted Ebola?
Well, the Ministry of Health in the Democratic Republic of Congo has said that he was with people with Ebola. He then got on a bus, travelled 200 kilometres down from a place called Butembo, an area that's been particularly badly affected by Ebola, with around 20 other people on board that bus, came down, felt sick on that journey, and was then identified. The Ministry of Health says very quickly, in fact, he was identified as a potential Ebola patient and was taken to an Ebola treatment centre. So,
Tulip, are there lots of positives here? He was identified quickly, and it seems they're vaccinating the people who were on the bus with him too.
Exactly. I think that's one of the key differences to what we saw in the previous worst outbreak in West Africa. He was identified very quickly. There was a treatment centre that was ready and waiting for him. There have been no cases in Goma until now, but there's been a treatment centre open since February this year. Around 3,000 in fact health workers have been vaccinated in Goma already. They were bracing themselves for this. So in that way, yes, there are some positives here. But as you say, Goma is a very populated city. It's the provincial capital. It's very close to the Rwandan border, and people do travel in between. So this is a great concern, but there have been things that have been put in place well before this case came there, and that will hopefully stop any other cases from developing in that city.
And Tulip, clearly when something like this happens, it causes quite a lot of fear. What kind of strides have been made in terms of informing the public about Ebola?
The fear is something that, of course, follows Ebola around. It's you know, people in these very remote communities often who don't have a lot of access to good health care will all of a sudden see, as we've been watching, you know, these people in these spacesuits coming in, offering to help them, taking away their loved ones.
We have some pictures here of you in a spacesuit as well. You were there at the very worst moments of the outbreak.
Exactly. I was there in West Africa, and we saw there what we're seeing here, which was a real lack of trust. People just didn't believe Ebola was real, and that improved. Sort of, you know, it took time, but it did improve. We're a year on since a national emergency was declared in DRC with the Ebola outbreak, and people still don't trust that Ebola is real, which is why we're seeing so many people coming to Ebola treatment centres quite late, and which is why we're seeing so many people dying. There have been over 1,000 cases now of people who have been killed, 2,400 cases of Ebola itself. But the added complication here is the conflict. So in a lot of these areas, you know, there are armed gangs that are going round. More than or almost 200 health workers have been attacked. 2 were killed just this weekend. So it's a completely different ball game, and that's really hampering efforts and really hampering people's you know, ability to go and get treatment, but also be told, you know, how to protect themselves. So this is a very different situation to what we're seeing in West Africa.
Julep, thanks for joining us. Let's update you now on some other news and take you to Hong Kong, where officials say 2 people were critically injured. 4 more are in a serious condition in hospital. It follows a series of clashes between police and demonstrators over the weekend. At the centre of the protest was the proposal to allow extradition to mainland China. More than 40 arrests were made. Official figures from China show the economy there is growing at its slowest pace since the early 1990s. It rose by 6.2% year on year in the 3 months to June. That comes after President Trump imposed hundreds of billions of dollars of trade tariffs on Chinese goods, with Beijing responding with its own import taxes on US goods. This is a big story. Aaron will bring you more on that in business coming up a little later in the programme.